here's an incredibly hard truth. Sometimes experiencing brokenness is required before God can bless you. This is a painful thing to consider because we know that there is a certain pain that is inevitable with growth. We're going to be going through a story of one of my favorite people in the Bible. It's a guy by the name of Jacob. He's in the Old Testament in the first book called Genesis, and his story takes place in Genesis 32. And what's interesting about Jacob is his name. His name literally means heel grabber. He is one who supplants, he manipulates, he deceives, and he gets this name because it's actually how he was born, his story says. That he's got this older twin brother named Esau, who's just a few minutes ahead of him. So Esau is on his way out of the womb first, and so what does Jacob do? Jacob grabs the heel so he can kind of get a trip out with him, right? And so from that moment, he's grasping at Esau's heels. He's trying to scheme and get ahead and deceive. And so we see that the story of his life is a pretty interesting one. He manipulates his brother Esau to get the birthright. He tricks his blind dad into giving him his older brother's birthright. He then runs away when everything blows up and gets bad. He works different angles with his uncles, and he schemes his way into a marriage and wealth, into all of these different possessions, and tries to kind of get influence and a life out of that. And so Jacob is this very person, right? He lives his whole life in this 2-lane race. He's always looking at the people behind him in the rearview mirror as suckers, and then he's always looking to the people in front of him as folks that he needs to figure out how to get around and manipulate and get ahead of. And eventually, we know that most of the time, for a lot of people in life, when you live this way, that kind of catches up to you, right, in some point or another. And Jacob is no exception to this. In fact, Jacob is actually a pretty good test case for this theory. What goes around kind of feels like it can come around, right? And so this is where we see Jacob's life. And in our story, what's going to happen is the background for it is Jacob's brother Esau is coming, right? He's coming to get his. And so Jacob is terrified that he's going to kill him and that he's like going to have to actually pay for, stealing his brother's birthright. And so Esau is bringing 400 men with him. So in Genesis 32, our story picks up with Jacob feeling panicked and he's grasping for control, and this is the first thing he does. It says, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau. I'm sending this message to my Lord that I might find favor in your eyes. What a bold statement, all right? I tricked you out of your birthright. I got all of the inheritance that was meant for you. I took it. So I'm incredibly wealthy with all of your money, all of your goats, all of your cattle, all of your things. And I'm going to send you some messages and some of those very cattle and things that I stole from you as like a bribe to get favor so that you'll see me and not want to kill me. Right? Immediately, Jacob begins, he's panicked. So he begins to scheme and plan and see what he can do to manipulate the situation in order to control it. And so as he's unable to get beyond himself in that moment, as the reader, we immediately get to see that he's living out his namesake, right? That this is the story of this guy. Like you should read this and not feel any surprise from the text at all. That's just kind of like, yeah, that kind of tracks, that feels about right. And so what we see, what this really means is that Jacob is stuck. He's presented with another hard scenario, by the way, that he put himself in. And as he's confronted with this reality, he's got to try and figure it out. And let's be honest, before we judge him too hard, we do this too as people, right? Like we make these types of moves all the time. Sometimes when tension builds in our marriage, instead of saying sorry, we buy flowers. Or if a friend is frustrated at us, we ghost the friendship or blow it up entirely. Or if there's something that we need to cop to and own in our faith, maybe we're starting to feel like it's shaking, our foundations are rough. Instead of being willing to enter into that tension, it's like a solid Instagram quote, right? Like, God loves you. Oh yeah, great, I'm solved, it's all good. Right? We try to manage and control situations all of the time. So we're not that much better than Jacob. But then what we see in this text is something unexpected happens to him. Now, I want to tell you just ahead of time, these next kind of few verses are one of those things that when you read an Old Testament passage kind of make you scratch your head just a little bit And that's fine, and we're going to talk about what that is. So when you read this text with me here up on the screen and get confused, don't worry, we'll talk about it, but it is a little bit of a strange kind of passage, right? So it's verse 24. It says, so Jacob was left alone, right? So now he sent all of his possessions, his wives, across this river so that they can get ahead of him, and he's going to stay the night by himself in this little camp. There, so it says, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. We don't know where the man came from, what he was doing there, or like how he appeared out of nowhere, but he's just there. All right, and so when the man saw that he could not overpower him being Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. All right, so this is like, if you're going, like, what is going on here? You're in good company, okay? It's a very weird part of the story. He's like, all of his family, all of his possessions have gone across the river. It's by himself. And then boom, he's in a wrestling match with somebody he's never met, seen, or knew was even in his camp. And in fact, they're wrestling so hard and they're struggling so long and they're going at it that this guy actually does whatever karate move and just knocks his hip out of its socket. And so now Jacob's got a messed up hip, but it still doesn't deter him from still holding on to the man, to continue to wrestle, to be willing to go at it all night long until daybreak when the guy says, hey, you got to let me go. Like, I got to go. It's the daytime. Apparently, I got other people to wrestle and places to be, right? This is not a clean encounter for Jacob. This isn't praying over coffee or some type of morning devotional. This is a brawl with God Almighty in the dark, right? This is Jacob not getting to walk away with peace, knowing that this situation that he created is not one that he gets to run from, but in fact, he's going to have to, at least for in the moment, walk away with pain. You see, in that story, what Jacob's been doing is Jacob's been fighting all of his life with his brother, his family, his dad, his mom, even all the things. And now he's met this one person that he can't just simply overpower and run from, that he can't outwit, that he can't out-scheme, that he can't fleece. And he has to deal with what's right in front of him. And what does God do here? He doesn't overly explain stuff to Jacob about how to make his life better. In fact, he doesn't even comfort him in the fear that Jacob's feeling. He wrestles with him. And what we find is that this man touches Jacob's hip and dislocates it. And this isn't meant to be metaphorical in the story. It is a real physical dislocation of Jacob's hip out of his socket. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's hard to do and it's incredibly painful. And this is a limp that Jacob is going to have for the rest of his life. It's a reminder for Jacob that he met God in the dark and he didn't come out the same. That Jacob's life has been marred and defined in this one direction and God has changed it. And I want to stay with this for just a moment because this can be a really tough thing to talk about in church. It can be deeply uncomfortable because the reality is sometimes wrestling with God leaves us worse off, at least in the moment. Right? Sometimes prayer doesn't bring you peace, it just brings more questions. Sometimes, for many of us, obedience doesn't lead to a miracle, it leads to loneliness. Because when you cut off a bad relationship, when you take the steps that God tells you to take, when you're willing to follow his plan, it costs you things. And that can be a very isolating spot to find yourself in. Sometimes faithfulness to God doesn't feel like a blessing, it feels just like a limp. And these are uncomfortable things for us to think about, let alone talk out loud in a Sunday morning service. Growth hurts. Oftentimes, transformation breaks something in us for God to make us who we're supposed to be. And so I don't know if you or who may need to hear this morning, but what I do know is that if you're somebody who feels like your faith is stuck, or you're struggling, or you're wrestling, or you feel like it's lifeless, and you've been walking or wrestling with God, and you've been walking away bruised or with the limp, you're not doing faith wrong. You have to know you are not doing faith wrong. You're doing it exactly like Jacob. And here's an incredibly hard truth. Sometimes experiencing brokenness is required before God can bless you. This is a painful thing to consider because we know that there is a certain pain that is inevitable with growth. In 1988, the great prophet Bret Michaels told us, every rose has its thorn. There is pain in beauty. I was going to sing it for you, but decided not to. There is a very real version of this that I love. You may have seen this film. James Franco did it a number of years ago now. It's called 127 Hours. And it's about this guy who's like a hiker, and he goes off by himself, which I never understand why hikers do. And he's like doing some slot canyon and gets stuck in Utah or something like that. And his arm is crushed, and it's pinned in a boulder. And he can't get out. And so in the movie and in real life, there's like video footage of him talking about like, hey, when you guys find my body, like tell my parents, this is where they live, this is who they are, tell them I love them, and all those things. And this whole time, his arm's just stuck in the boulder like this. And he goes through this like loopiness, and he's trying to get out and kind of finagle everything and do everything that he can think of, but like the one thing that he knows for sure will work, right? And so eventually he realizes he's got no other option. He's got a pocket knife on him and all the time in the world, unfortunately. And so he's got to do everything that he's got to do to leave his arm there and walk out with the rest of his body. And so he wrestles with that. He wrestles with the passing out from the loss of blood, from being scared, from the pain. He comes back to, and he gets right back to work. Passes out again, and he does this over and over until it's finally free. The thing that was stopping him, that was keeping him stuck, was finally free. And this is a really morbid and graphic and extreme example of what that looks like to wrestle. But there is such a beautiful parallel in that story and what happens in our spiritual life. There has to be a willingness to do whatever it takes to get free, to be unstuck, to be that committed to God. This is what the conversation is, and it's deeply, deeply hard. No wonder we feel stuck a lot. We live in such comfortable places. And the idea of being willing to be that spiritually desperate for the Lord is a hard thing to imagine some days. And that's okay. Because that's honest and that's truth and that's where God meets us. We have to be willing to wrestle with God in order to experience any type of new movement. And there's no way around this. All right, so we pick that story back up. Jacob's hip is out of joint, all right, and he's holding on for dear life. And then we get this in 27. It says, the man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. And then the man said, you will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. All right, this isn't small talk when they're in a huddle with each other, right? This is God speaking directly to him. He says, what is your name? In the ancient world, to name something was to define it. That's why names are so important in Scripture. And so we know what Jacob's name already, right? Literally grasper, schemer, deceiver. And so when God says, what is your name? He's not just asking like for information, right? What he's actually doing is asking for confession, right? He's saying, who are you? And Jacob says, I'm all of these things. Name what you've been. Tell me who you are. And for the first time in Jacob's life, he's not posturing. He's not pretending to be Esau like he did with his father. He just simply says, I'm Jacob. I'm the one who manipulates, the one who runs. I'm the one who hurts people before they have any type of ability to hurt me. And God knows all these things about him. But you see, what's interesting is it's that honesty, it's that self-naming, that self-recognition that is the doorway that leads to transformation. This willingness for him to be honest with himself. And so God says next, all right, you're not Jacob, you're Israel. Because Israel means to struggle with God, not he defeated God, or he outsmarted God, or he was able to figure out how to pull a fast one over on God. It's he struggled and was real and authentic and sincere and didn't have to make anything up, didn't have to walk in on a Sunday and pretend he had it all together when he was actually really stuck. He was honest about who he was in relation to God. And what I hope you'll know is that your faith, your level of it, your maturity in it, is not defined by how certain you are that it's real or that you're right, that you have the right answers. Your faith and your level of it and your certainty of it are not things that are correlated. What matters for your faith is your refusal to let go. You see, it's easy to be people who walk around and say like, yep, I know I'm right. I got it together. This is my way. It's the highway. There's nothing in between. There's no room for anything like God says it this way. It's the only way to think. But that maturation is on display when you can say, I'm wrestling with that. That's hard for me. This can be tough. Transformation in our life doesn't come from ease. It comes from engagement with God. You see, God doesn't just hand out blessings when you're sitting on the sidelines. The idea is to be an active participant in your own relational journey with Christ, to wrestle, to have hard conversations, to be willing to get after it. And this is one of the places where it's most important for our connection today, is that God doesn't just remove tension from your life when you ask him to. But what God is willing to do is meet you inside of it and to go through it with you. This is the whole point about following Jesus, because tensions are going to arise in your life, whether you believe in God or not. That has nothing to do with the divine claim on the person of Christ. What we offer as followers of Jesus is this understanding that you don't have to go through the tension alone. That the person who's your partner in the midst of it, your sparring partner, your wrestling partner, or the person who will hold you through that dark night of your soul is the creator of the entire universe who has authority and dominion over that tension. That's the difference. You don't have to go it alone if you don't want to. God doesn't show up in Jacob's story with a plan or a peace treaty. He shows up in the night as a sparring partner, right? The God that we serve is not one of spiritual shortcuts. It's the God who meets us in the dark, throws us to the mat, and says, I'm not letting you go until you know who you really are. You see, even with that, he didn't fix Jacob's life overnight. Esau was still coming, right? Like there was this real thing that he had to deal with. And now he had a dislocated hip to boot. He should have wrestled with God way earlier in his life, like when he was a kid. It would have been way better for him. Jacob walks away with a limp, for sure, but also a new name. And for the first time in his life, Jacob doesn't have to run. He doesn't have to work at scheming or living out his namesake. He's allowed to authentically be who he is, a person in the middle of the struggle, in the middle of the mess. And the same thing is true for us this morning. That no matter how long we run, no matter where we find ourselves, we can also be people who don't have to grasp, who don't have to scheme, who don't have to try to get ahead, who don't have to stay stuck. We can be people this morning, right now, who can go into a wrestling sparring match with God on the mat and know that it's a safe place to do so.